In the grim darkness of the far future, even death can be a mercy. There is a punishment and a form of life so horrific that many in the Imperium of Man consider it a fate worse than death. This is the fate of the Servitor, those unfortunate souls who have been stripped of their humanity and turned into mindless cybernetic drones. Imagine a living human fused with cold machinery, personality wiped clean, existing only to obey. That is a servitor, a cyborg slave of the Imperium, trudging through a bleak half-life of endless labor. Servitors are everywhere in the Imperium of Man. They haunt the war-torn battlefields, they toil in the guts of starships and hive cities, and they serve in laboratories and shrines. They are recognizable by their grotesque appearance: pallid flesh studded with implants, limbs replaced with mechanical tools, eyes often dim or replaced by glowing optics. A servitor that might have a heavy lifting claw instead of an arm, or a data port drilled straight into its skull. Its expression is usually vacant, slack-jawed, or locked in a permanent ghastly stare if its face is more machine than man. No spark of self remains in those dull eyes, only the cold glow of programmed purpose. These shambling cyborgs perform the menial and the dangerous tasks that humans would rather avoid or dare not entrust to machines. For in the Imperium, true machines, true artificial intelligences, are abominated and forbidden. Instead, the Imperium uses what's left of a human brain to drive its robots. It's a grim solution born of ancient nightmares, and it ensures that countless beings endure a nightmare of their own. Origins: why the Imperium needs servitors. To understand how servitors came to be, we must turn back the pages of history to a time long before the Imperium. During the legendary Dark Age of technology, humanity's golden age, mankind's science birthed wonders and horrors. Chief among those horrors were the men of iron, sentient robots and artificial intelligences that humanity created to serve them. That relationship ended in catastrophe. The men of iron rebelled against their creators in a cataclysmic war. This ancient machine uprising nearly wiped out humanity. In the aftermath, once the Emperor of Mankind rose to power, he and his followers swore that never again would soulless machines be given free rein. Abominable intelligence, self-aware AI, was strictly forbidden. The priests of Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus, took this law into their faith, declaring that true machine intelligence is a blasphemy against their god, the Omnissa, the machine god. Yet the galaxy-spanning Imperium could not function without labor and computation on a massive scale. There are trillions of tasks too dangerous, tedious, or complex for unaugmented humans to do alone. Banning intelligent machines didn't make those needs go away. So the Imperium found a twisted workaround: use human beings as the machines. Better to enslave flesh and bone than to rely on forbidden silicon souls. The Adeptus Mechanicus had long mastered bioengineering and cybernetics, so they began creating servitors, part human, part machine drones. In essence, a servitor is a human-derived robot, its mind wiped clean of independent thought, its body augmented with mechanical parts to perform a specific function. This was the Imperium's answer to the labor and computational needs that robots might have filled. By the letter of the law, a servitor is not an artificial intelligence at all. It has an organic brain, albeit a heavily conditioned one, and thus it's an acceptable servant of man and machine god. It's a cruel logic. Rather than risk a thinking machine that might rebel, the Imperium would rather mutilate a human into an unthinking machine that cannot rebel. The cult, Mechanicus, even frames it as a pious act. To them, turning a human into a servitor is not murder or slavery. It is the improvement of impure flesh with holy metal, and a pragmatic way to avoid the sin of true AI. Of course, from a more humane perspective, it's a horror beyond reckoning. But in the Imperium of Man, pragmatism and piety trump mercy. The result is an entire class of beings who exist in a gray area between life and death, humanity and machine, will and programming. Thus, servitors became one of the few tolerated forms of robotic labor in the Imperium. A citizen of the Imperium might see automated factory equipment or heavy construction rigs here and there, but fully independent robots are virtually non-existent. Instead, they see servitors, lobotomized humans carrying out those roles. On a forge world, the industrial planets of the Adeptus Mechanicus like Mars, servitors make up a huge bulk of the population. Picture the endless assembly lines and smog-choked foundries of Mars. For every robed tech priest overseeing the work, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of servitors mindlessly manning conveyor belts, welding hull plates, or hauling mineral ore. On battlefields and void ships, servitors lug ammunition, load cannons, and perform quick repairs in hazardous conditions where a normal man would fear to tread. Across the Imperium, servitors are as ubiquitous as machinery, because they are the machinery in many cases. How a human becomes a servitor. Servitude in perpetuis. To create a servitor, one must start with a human body and brain. But who would volunteer for such a fate? Unsurprisingly, almost no one. The vast majority of servitors are not willing participants. They are grown or taken for that purpose. Broadly, there are two sources for servitors in the Imperium: vat-grown clones. In many cases, servitors are grown in labs, cloned or genetically bred for the sole purpose of becoming a mindless worker. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains biovats and cloning facilities where human genetic stock is used to grow living bodies. These beings are often engineered to be docile and biologically suited to cybernetic implantation. They reach maturity and are then implanted with neural control devices, given minimal programming, and sent off to work. These clone servitors, sometimes called replicae, are considered property from birth. They were never people in the eyes of the Imperium. They were created as organic components for machine slaves. It might be marginally less horrific to imagine a servitor that was never fully conscious to begin with, but it is still a living being made for exploitation. Condemned humans, criminals, and heretics. Other servitors are made from once living, breathing people, often those whom imperial justice has deemed unworthy of a normal life. In imperial law, there is a punishment called servitude in perpetuis, which in High Gothic means perpetual servitude. This is as dreadful as it sounds, a life sentence of being turned into a servitor. It is frequently given to criminals who have committed severe crimes or who have in some way offended the Adeptus Mechanicus. Tech heresy, the misuse or blasphemy against machines and technology, is a particularly common offense that will get you handed over to the Mechanicus for servitor conversion. An imperial judge, arbites judges or arbitrators, might slam the gavel and sentence a heretic or a heinous criminal to servitude in perpetuis without possibility of reprieve. That person is then dragged away to a tech priest's workshop, and they will emerge as something far less than human. Those considered for this fate can range from murderers and recidivist scum to political prisoners, to anyone the Imperium has decided it doesn't want to simply execute. The ecclesiarchy, imperial church, generally prefers to execute true heretics outright as a mercy to their soul. But the Adeptus Mechanicus often argues that certain offenders, especially those who misuse technology or offend the machine cult, are more useful as servitors. Even some common criminals may get this punishment if servitor labor is in high demand. In the shadowy factories of the Imperium, one cynic could observe that the number of crimes that earn servitor conversion seems to grow in proportion to the need for cheap labor. Steal from a holy shrine's donation box? You might find yourself lobotomized and scrubbing floors for the rest of your life. Be the unlucky worker on shift when a manufacturum accident happens. The overseers might decide someone needs to be punished as an example, and you're the convenient scapegoat who ends up handed to the cyber surgeons. The Imperium is not known for leniency or justice. It is known for making use of every resource, and human bodies and brains are just another resource to exploit. There's also a third, more unusual source of servitors worth noting: failed space marine aspirants. The Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines, recruit from feral and hive worlds, putting young candidates through brutal trials and genetic implantation. Many aspirants die or are crippled in the process. A failed initiate who survives but is left catatonic or otherwise unfit might be repurposed as a servitor by the chapter. Waste not, want not. If a teenager you dragged off to make into a space marine ends up a vegetable, at least he can still carry a ammo crate or polish the chapter's armor as a lobotomized thrall. For example, the Black Templars chapter is known to turn certain failed neophytes into Cenobite servitors, which carry the chapter's sacred relics into battle and intone prayers. Other chapters have similar grim practices. Those who cannot become space marines might instead become servitors or chapter serfs. It's an unimaginably cruel demotion, from the dream of being a godlike super soldier to the reality of being an emotionless servitor, all because your body didn't take the gene seed properly. But such is the economy of the Imperium's cruelty. Once the decision is made that an individual is to be made into a servitor, whether grown in a vat or condemned by a court, the process of transformation begins. It is not gentle. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus oversee the procedure, for it involves both biological and mechanical expertise, as well as arcane tech ritual. The human will be surgically lobotomized. Parts of the brain that house personality, memory, and autonomy are cut away or neutralized with mind wipe procedures. Inmates destined for servitor conversion are often first mind wiped using electos or CIA tech, essentially erasing their memories and higher cognitive functions. It's like formatting a cogitator's hard drive, except the hard drive is a living brain. What remains is a human body with only the most rudimentary brain functions intact, enough to breathe, circulate blood, maybe walk, and respond to simple instructions after reprogramming. After, or often during, the lobotomization, cybernetic implants are installed throughout the body. These vary depending on what role the servitor will fulfill. Common augmentations include control units in the brain to receive commands, nutrient feed tubes and chemical injectors to sustain the body, replacement of limbs with mechanical tools, such as crane arms, drills, injector limbs, weapon mounts, visual sensors replacing eyes, auditory implants, and often bulky power packs or batteries grafted onto the back to power all these enhancements. The surgeries are invasive and grotesque. Limbs might be amputated and swapped for piston-driven prosthetics. The lower body might be fused into a tracked chassis or a heavy support frame for industrial servitors. In some cases, a servitor is literally built into a larger piece of machinery or a static immobile unit. Their torso or brain might be wired into a factory control system or a spacecraft as a living computer component. Pain during these procedures is a given. Whether the subject is even aware enough to feel, it depends on how far along the mind wipe is. One can only hope that by the time the tech priests start bolting on the mechanical parts, the person isn't fully there to experience the agony. But there are dark rumors that sometimes they are. The degree of consciousness left in a servitor can vary. Ideally, from the mechanicus perspective, the perfect servitor has no will or lingering identity at all. It's an empty organic CPU following its programming. Indeed, many servitors are exactly that, blank-minded. They can't think or desire anything beyond their narrow task programming. However, not all conversions are perfect. Sometimes fragments of the human personality remain. There are accounts of servitors that can speak in simple sentences or react with animal-like fear or frustration under certain stimuli, indicating some vestige of emotion. Tech priests acknowledge that mind-wiping isn't always an exact, uniform process. The amount of brain function removed might differ case by case. A servitor made for a relatively complex task might be left with a bit more cognitive ability, just enough to do its job, while one made for brute labor can be scrubbed almost completely clean. And then there are cases, particularly punitive conversions for tech heretics, where the mechanicus deliberately leaves the person's mind more intact than usual as an act of torment. Yes, it's as horrifying as it sounds. They can choose how much of you remains inside the servitor. Officially, leaving a servitor fully aware but unable to act is considered incredibly cruel and not standard practice. Some would say it skirts close to forbidden territory. But there are whispers of vengeful magi and lords who impose that horror on particularly hated enemies. With delicate calibration, a tech priest can sever the parts of the brain that control voluntary action, while leaving the consciousness untouched. The result is a prisoner in one's own body, fully cognizant of everything, yet utterly incapable of resisting the programming that forces your body to obey orders. You watch, helpless inside your skull, as you perform whatever menial or violent tasks your masters decree. Such a state has been poetically described as, "I have no mouth, and I must scream," a living nightmare where the soul is trapped. It's said that the Martian tech priests reserve this fate for the worst techno-heretics as the ultimate punishment. Instead of execution, you live on in perpetual servitude, aware of every second of your degradation. Even when this extreme isn't the case, the process always destroys the person you were. For most servitors, once lobotomized and implanted, that individual is gone. What's left might technically be their body, maybe scraps of their brain, but not their self. In a darkly ironic twist, imperial authorities sometimes frame servitor conversion as offering criminals one last chance to serve the emperor. After screwing up in life, you get to redeem yourself by being turned into a mindless tool for the Imperium's use. How generous! Existence as a servitor, mindless toil, and silent screams. What is it like to be a servitor? Try to imagine, if you can, the absolute worst and longest menial job in the galaxy, with no days off, no pay, no hope of escape, and no mind to even dream of escape. That is a servitor's existence in a nutshell. They are typically programmed for one specific function, hence the term monotask servitor often used. They wake, or rather activate, and carry out that function, and when not needed, they power down or stand by in some storage bay like an appliance. A servitor doesn't sleep in the human sense. It might be shut off or put in a low-power state when not in use. Many have charging ports or nutrient drips that they must periodically connect to, often under supervision of a tech priest or handler. For example, in the bowels of a warship, servitors that load macro cannons might be slotted into alcoves when the guns are idle, effectively hung on hooks like tools, fed with energy and a bland nutrient slurry through tubes. When the battle station's alarm sounds, they jolt to life and plod to their assigned loading mechanism, performing their task repetitively until the engagement is over. Then back on the hooks they go. Awareness. If the servitor has been properly mind-wiped, its awareness is extremely limited. It perceives basic instructions, maybe via spoken order, hardwired commands, or even telepathic link from a supervising tech priest. It might register simple aspects of its environment relevant to its task, like object in front of me to weld or target acquired. But it does not truly interpret or think about these things. It has no sense of self, no concept of past or future. In many ways, it's less aware than an animal. It's more like an automaton that happens to have organic parts. There is no fear, no curiosity, no joy, no sorrow, nothing but a sort of dim presentness and a compulsion to complete whatever routine is etched into its brain. That said, some servitors do display odd behaviors when left unsupervised. Many models are prone to a sort of glitch called mind lock. If a servitor is not receiving guidance, or if it encounters a situation outside its programming, it can become confused and unresponsive. In such cases, witnesses have heard servitors start to babble gibberish or loop phrases endlessly, as if the fragment of brain left inside is short-circuiting, trying to assert some ghost of individuality or simply malfunctioning. Typically, a quick reset or a command from a tech priest will snap them out of it. But it's eerie to think that perhaps, deep in that ruined brain, some flicker of the old self is trying to reawaken and failing, leaving the servitor twitching and muttering nonsense. Tech priests take great care to prevent this. They often accompany servitors or install control fail-safes to keep them on task. In battlefield conditions, for example, servitors are usually telepathically or wirelessly guided by a nearby tech marine or engineer who can effectively jumpstart their simple minds with commands and keep them focused. For those servitors who retain consciousness internally, the nightmare scenario, existence is pure torment. Imagine being locked in a prison made of your own flesh. Your arms move, but not by your will. Your legs walk, your hands grasp tools or weapons. Your voice might even recite litanies or acknowledgement of orders, but you are not controlling any of it. You are simply watching, a passenger in your own skull. Time blurs. You cannot sleep or block out the world. You may not even be able to form coherent thoughts after some time. Just a continuous scream of despair inside, silently looping as you march through endless days. Some lore implies that on a soul level, this agony is palpable. Psychers, those with psychic senses, have looked upon servitors and recoiled at the spiritual suffering of these husks. There are stories of servants of the Inquisition who felt the tortured echoes in a servitor's mind, and it nearly drove them mad with pity and horror. One particularly harrowing portrayal comes from recent accounts on a hive world. In the game Warhammer 40,000 as Darktide, one can encounter Medicae servitors, essentially medical drone servitors that administer combat stimulants or healing functions to wounded soldiers. When their station runs out of supplies, these med servitors begin to mutter fragmented pleas. In an emotionless monotone, one begged, "Please, I am so lonely. Take me with you," as the fighters moved on. Another was heard to say, "My mind, slipping, darkness, please," before shutting down. These chilling lines suggest that there was enough of the person left to feel despair, to fear the lonely darkness when not actively working. Perhaps it's just programming quirks, but more likely it's an intentionally planted example of how cruel this existence is. Even if only a spark of self-awareness remains, that spark might experience every moment as torture by boredom and isolation, unable to do anything but wait for someone to give a new command or for eventual oblivion. Most servitors, thankfully, if that word can even apply, do not have such lucid inner lives. They are mindless as intended. But even mindless servitors can suffer in the physical sense. The human body, no matter the augments, can feel pain, and servitor conversion surgeries aren't always clean or gentle. One can imagine a poorly calibrated mechanical joint grinding against bone, or an invasive implant causing constant discomfort. Does a servitor feel that pain? Many probably have pain receptors deadened or removed, but if not fully, they might indeed hurt, yet lack the will or voice to even groan. They will continue their task regardless, marching on a shattered leg or with sparks flying from a cracked cybernetic eye until they literally cannot move. It's not uncommon to see an old servitor whose organic components are decaying. Gray, necrotic flesh around metal grafts, perhaps held up by regular injections of preservatives. The mechanicus does perform maintenance on servitors to keep them operational, replacing worn-out limbs, topping up chemical nutrients, etc., but only to a point. A servitor is ultimately a disposable appliance. When it breaks down too much, it's often easier to scrap it and install a fresh one than to repair it. Indeed, servitors have a lifespan, though it varies. Some heavy-duty servitors might grind to a halt after a few years of intense labor, their biological parts failing. Others, especially if well-maintained and in less dangerous roles, can persist for decades. There are anecdotes of servitors lasting centuries, perhaps because their flesh is periodically renewed, or they spend a lot of time dormant between tasks. In one extreme, and perhaps apocryphal case, the Adeptus Mechanicus purportedly still has a functioning servoskull, a type of mini-servitor, essentially just a skull and brain, from the Age of Terra, implying a preservation of over 10,000 years. But servoskulls are a special case. We'll get to them shortly. For a standard servitor, long existence is just long suffering or long drudgery, and when the end finally comes, it's not a gentle death in bed. It's usually being thrown into a plasma furnace for incineration or abandoned in a war zone to be blown apart. The Imperium does not honor its servitors when they die. They just replace them like one would replace a burnt-out cog. One small grim consolation: a servitor is generally useless to the dark powers of chaos. Since it has no real emotions or desires, it cannot be tempted by demons or the whispers of the warp. It has no ambition, no fear, beyond maybe a primal spark, so chaos corruption rarely takes root. Demonic possession of a servitor is exceedingly rare. It's like a demon trying to possess a mindless doll. There's just not enough there to latch onto or to corrupt. In fact, the soullessness of servitors is so pronounced that demons find them unpalatable. Possessing one gives the demon no pleasure or sustenance, akin to inhabiting a hollow shell. That said, with great effort, a powerful warp entity could possess a servitor. Chaos finds ways to defile anything, given time. But it's not a common threat. So, ironically, the servitor's lack of self makes it a safe tool against chaos. It will never willfully turn on its master, never fall to temptation, never run in fear from a demon. It will plod right into the jaws of hell if programmed to. Of course, it also won't have the sense to run away from an impending demonic incursion, so it might get destroyed easily, but at least it won't join the enemy. This resistance to chaos is one reason servitors are trusted in sensitive roles. For example, guarding dangerous artifacts or accompanying inquisitors into warp-tainted sites. A human assistant might be seduced by forbidden lore or terrorized by what they see, but a servitor will stay oblivious and on task. It's hard to corrupt something that has no personal will. In the incredibly grim worldview of the Imperium, some might call that an advantage. Better a soulless drone than a free man who could err. It's a sentiment that explains much about how the Imperium operates. The many types of servitors, one fate, countless forms. All servitors share the tragic essence of being lobotomized cyborg workers, but they are not all the same. The Imperium has been churning out servitors for over 10,000 years, customizing them for every imaginable task. Attempting to list every type of servitor in the galaxy would be impossible. There are countless designs, patterns, and localized variants. However, we can explore the most common and notable categories of servitors to get a sense of the breadth of this practice. From lowly sewage cleaners to hulking combat monsters. If there's a job to be done, there's a servitor for it. Menial and industrial servitors. These are the workhorses of the Imperium's economy, the tireless laborers that perform heavy or repetitive tasks in factories, mines, starships, and cities. They are usually not built for combat at all, but for strength, precision, or durability in hazardous environments. Technomats, a broad term for servitors used to operate and maintain machinery. A technomat servitor might be found on a manufacturing line, its arms replaced with multi-tools like spanners, welding torches, or manipulators. It can tighten bolts all day long without tiring or make fine adjustments to engines under the direct guidance of a tech priest. Essentially, they are living machine operators or maintenance drones. They often have extra servo arms mounted on their back for holding tools or parts, and many are mounted on tracks or have reinforced legs to support heavy loads. If you walk into a reactor room on a void ship, you might see a cluster of technomat servitors crawling over a plasma conduit, screwing and soldering like a bunch of mechanized ants. Industrial loaders. Load lifters. These servitors are modified to carry heavy weights and perform brute labor. Many have massively overdeveloped upper bodies with piston-driven arms and clamp-like hands. They can haul cargo crates, stack munitions, or shovel ore in mines tirelessly. Some are quadrupedal or have tank-like treads instead of legs to stabilize heavy lifting. Golem servitors are a subtype often used in starports, big, lumbering units with thick pincer hands for grabbing freight containers. They can replace entire teams of human stevedores. These poor brutes typically have almost no cognitive function beyond move object from point A to point B, leave one idle without orders, and it might just stand frozen until someone comes and plugs in a new instruction or moves it like a piece of furniture. Drones. In some imperial texts, drone refers to the simplest servitors, those nearly brain-dead, used for only the most mindless tasks. A drone servitor might be something like a human torso mounted on a wheeled chassis with one arm that holds a brush or spray gun, endlessly painting a wall or scrubbing floors. They truly are nothing more than living robots, useful for drudgery and little else. Scribe and data servitors. Not all labor is heavy, some is tedious clerical work. For that, the administratum employs servitors as well. A lexomatic servitor, or lex mechanic, also called lexomat, is essentially a human calculator or typewriter. These servitors have enhanced brain implants for data storage and computation. They might have multiple mechadendrite quills or interfaces instead of hands. Their job could be to copy documents, tally numbers, or take dictation. For example, a calligraphous servitor is outfitted with several fine manipulator arms, each holding a pen or stylus. It can transcribe everything it hears, or duplicate a text perfectly onto multiple pages at once. In the halls of imperial bureaucracy, you might find entire rooms of these scribe servitors, endlessly copying records and scriptures without pause or error, unless they malfunction and start writing gibberish lines of code among the text. They lack creativity, but they will never complain about writer's cramp. Logis servitors and cogitator cores. These are servitors used as living computers. Sometimes a servitor's brain is linked directly with cogitator computer systems to process information. On Hive World Necromunda, for example, there's mention of cogitator core servitors. standard servitors with additional brain augmentation, spliced with machine logic engines to monitor systems. They can regulate underhive machinery or watch surveillance feeds with unblinking efficiency. Effectively, the person's brain is just a biological CPU for a network, churning through calculations and data sorting. Medical servitors, medici servitor, these serve as automated medics or surgeons. A med servitor might have multiple syringe-tipped limbs, buzzsaws, and staple guns for field surgery, even defibrillator pads built into its hands. They are programmed with medical protocols and can perform emergency treatment or autopsies. In the best cases, a medici servitor can actually save lives on the battlefield, albeit in a rather cold, mechanical manner. They might drag wounded soldiers to safety, inject coagulants and stims, saw off irreparably damaged limbs, and cauterize wounds, all without uttering a word of comfort, unless they're programmed to say, "Remain calm," in a monotone. Some wounded guardsmen have expressed an eerie discomfort at waking up to a blank-faced servitor tending to them. It's like being operated on by a corpse that moves. But when human medics are in short supply, these machines fill the role. The Sisters of Battle, Adeptus Sororitas, even have specialized ecclesiarchy, servitors modified to set up field hospitals and repair vehicles or buildings, aiding their holy campaigns. Environmental and utility servitors. If there's a job, there's a servitor for it. Some examples: Munitorum servitors in the Departamento. Munitorum, the supply arm of the Imperial Guard, shuffle around munition depots, moving ammo and weapons. Macro servitors are gigantic servitors used on archaeological digs or construction sites, equipped with massive drills and chainsaws to bore through rock or hive debris. Imagine a servitor the size of an ogrin, or bigger, with 4 arms built like industrial cranes. Runner servitors have been used in Imperial Guard regiments to ferry spent power packs from the battlefield back to recharge stations. These would gather bins of used lasgun batteries, plug them into charging ports, sometimes literally in the servitor's own body, then return fresh cells to the troops. There are even servitor imps, small, stunted servitors made from dwarfish human stock, able to crawl through narrow spaces with tools or carry surprisingly heavy loads for their size. Whatever niche exists, the mechanicus can adapt a human body to fit it, no matter how undignified. It's grimly humorous in a way. We might invent a robot to vacuum our floors. The Imperium instead might take a low-grade servitor, put a suction fan in its chest and brushes on its arms, and have a human-derived Roomba plodding along palace hallways. Why build a fancy autonomous mining drill when you can strap drill arms to a half-brainless convict and let him do the job? Combat and military servitors. While many servitors are designed for labor or support, others are built for warfare. These are the battle servitor, used as disposable soldiers, heavy weapons platforms, or bodyguards. They are not as adept or flexible as a living soldier, but they follow orders without hesitation and can be equipped with devastating weapons. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in particular, fields many combat servitors in its forces, and the Imperial Guard and Space Marines make use of them in support roles. Gun servitors. Perhaps the most common sight on battlefields, these servitors carry heavy guns that would be cumbersome for a normal human. Picture a cybernetic hulking figure trundling forward with a heavy bolter grafted onto its arm or a multi-melta power weapon integrated into its chassis. They serve as walking gun platforms. An Imperial Guard engineer, tech priest attached to the Guard, often has a couple of gun servitors under his command to provide covering fire while he repairs tanks or works machinery. These servitors usually have enhanced targeting implants and reinforced legs to handle the recoil of their weapons. They make for tireless sentries as well. A pair of gun servitors can guard a gate and never get bored or need sleep, scanning for targets with machine precision. Though woe betide if their recognition protocols glitch, there are tales of gun servitors occasionally not recognizing friend from foe after sustaining damage with tragic friendly fire results. Combat assault servitors. These are close combat counterparts to gun servitors. They might have bladed arms, power fists, or chain blades in place of limbs, and are heavily armored to withstand return blows. Their programming is simpler. Identify enemy, charge, hack slash, until enemy stops moving. In confined spaces like a starship corridor, combat servitors can be unleashed to clear borders or repel intruders. They feel no fear, so they'll plod into heavy fire to reach the enemy. Some have shock absorbers or heavy shields built into them to endure gunfire. Combat servitors are often seen alongside Space Marine tech marines or Inquisitors as brute muscle. They are distinct from fully trained cyborg soldiers like Skitarii. A combat servitor lacks any personal initiative or tactics. It just follows a preset routine aggressively. In fact, one must be careful. A combat servitor will not retreat or take cover unless explicitly commanded. It's literally too dumb to do so. This can be a liability or an asset, depending on how it's used. Arcoflagellants. While technically not called servitors by classification, arcoflagellants deserve mention. These are heretics or criminals handed over to the ecclesiarchy or ordo hereticus, witch hunters, who undergo a form of cybernetic penance. They are drugged and modified with lethal melee weapons, whipping electro cords, claws, etc. But crucially, their minds are not wiped. Instead, they are kept pacified by a cocktail of sedatives and fed hypnotic visions of repentance. When it's time to deploy them, a handler triggers them. The sedatives are overridden by combat drugs and pain stimulators, turning the arcoflagellant into a frenzied, uncontrollable berserker who will charge and rip apart anything in reach. They feel every bit of pain and rage as they do so. It's part of their punishment to suffer even as they kill the enemies of the faith. Arcoflagellants are one-use weapons. Many die in their rampages or are executed after battle if they can't be restrained. They differ from servitors in that their original consciousness is deliberately preserved to suffer rather than erased. In essence, it's an even more horrifying punishment, full awareness during a chemically induced violent madness. If servitors are a fate worse than death, arcoflagellation is perhaps a fate worse than servitors. However, both illustrate how the Imperium turns human bodies into weapons. Where servitors are cold and methodical, arcoflagellants are hot and hysterical, but both have had their humanity essentially stripped for use in war. Heavy battle servitors, cataphrons, and praetorians. The Adeptus Mechanicus's Skitarii legions, their cybernetic soldiers, are often supported by cataphron battle servitors. These are extremely augmented cyborgs, so altered that many don't even have legs, but rather tractor treads or half-tank bodies to support their bulk. A cataphron servitor has a human brain, or what's left of one, somewhere in that metal hull, but it is completely severed from any emotion or independent thought. It is essentially a living tank that can follow orders and fire weapons. There are two main patterns. Cataphron destroyers, outfitted with very heavy ranged weaponry like grav cannons or plasma culverins to annihilate infantry and light vehicles, and cataphron breachers, equipped with siege drills, melter weapons, arc rifles for breaching fortifications and taking out armor at close range. These units are bigger and more firepower heavy than typical servitors. They exemplify the mechanicus philosophy of why use a man when you can use a mind-wiped cyborg with the firepower of an armored vehicle. In battle, cataphrons roll forward under the direction of a tech priest dominus, laying down devastating fire or drilling through obstacles. They are slow and not nimble at all. You won't see one taking cover or executing clever flanking maneuvers. They just drive onward, guns blazing, until either nothing is left standing or they are destroyed. Many foes initially laugh at the plodding, half-senile appearance of these cyber slabs, until a volley of heavy plasma blasts reduces the front line to ash. Then it's not so funny. Another feared type is the Praetorian Servitor, often made from heavy, hardy stock like ogrins. Ogrins, abhuman brutes twice the size of a man, are naturally strong but not very bright, ideal candidates to become servitors. A Praetorian servitor is an ogrin whose already limited mind has been wiped and whose body has been fitted with thick armor plating and heavy weapons, like an integrated multi-gun array. The Adeptus Mechanicus uses these as guardians for their forges and magos. They are towering, heavily armored cyborg berserkers that can soak up a tremendous amount of firepower. If you imagine a giant half-robotic ogre lumbering towards intruders, shrugging off lasgun shots as if they were raindrops, and returning fire with an arm-mounted cannon, that's a Praetorian. They are very dangerous and perhaps the most deadly form of servitor on the battlefield, short of actual vehicles or dreadnoughts. Specialized battle servitors, the Imperium has many other niche variants. For example, the Imperial Navy uses a lighter pattern of battle servitor on void ships for boarding actions, sometimes called Charon pattern battle servitors. These are humanoid, often armed with shotguns or flamers, and used as security or shock troops during pirate boardings. They have a reputation, however, for sometimes glitching, their machine spirits becoming unreliable after recycling through many bodies, so some captains are wary of employing them except in dire need. The Inquisition and other secretive bodies have their own toys. There are tales of tech assassins, effectively servitors modified for stealth and killing, though details are sparse. One might assume they'd be like blade-armed, chemically camouflaged cyborgs unleashed to eliminate specific targets. But how much independence they'd need, and thus how not servitor they'd be, is questionable. On the other end of the spectrum, some servitors aren't meant to fight up close, but to serve as weapons support. For instance, those that carry ammunition and reload big guns. In some siege regiments, you might have breacher servitors carrying drilling charges to a fortress wall, or shielded variants that walk in front of troops as moving cover. The lathe pattern breacher servitor is an example. Originally a mining servitor with adamantine-tipped drills, repurposed to chew through enemy bunker doors and enemy heavy infantry if pointed at them. There's also the Pugnus-class combat servitor, essentially a bodyguard unit for mechanicus personnel with two massive energized fists and an internal shield generator, more like a clanking bipedal battering ram that stands between a tech priest and incoming bullets. Each of these designs speaks to a specific need. Whether it's tunneling through a wall or absorbing fire, the mechanicus likely has a servitor template for it. A key distinction to remember: servitors versus cyborg soldiers. The Imperium, especially the Mechanicus, also employs cyborg warriors that are not servitors because they retain their minds, or at least a portion of them. The Scitarii, for example, are the Mechanicus's main soldiers, heavily augmented troops who still have their personal will and tactical reasoning. A Scitarius might have mechanical limbs or implanted weapons, but he chooses to fight, albeit indoctrinated to obey orders unquestioningly. He's still technically a sentient being. Servitors, by contrast, have no will. They cannot adapt or think on their feet. They are literally dumb in the intellectual sense, even if physically powerful. Tech thralls, also known as ad secularis in the Horus heresy era, blur this line. These were combat cyborgs used by mechanicum forces in ancient times whose minds were mostly intact but bound to obey via control implants. One might say a tech thrall is almost a servitor but not fully lobotomized, essentially cannon fodder that can still feel fear internally, but is forced to march forward anyway. But since the question is about servitors, suffice it that official servitors used in combat are basically weapons that aim and pull their own trigger when told to. Nothing more be. Utility servitors and oddities. Beyond labor and war, servitors fill myriad specialized roles in imperial life, some of which are quite bizarre. The Adeptus Mechanicus and other organizations have pushed the concept to some extremes. Servo skulls. An iconic sight in the Imperium, servo skulls are literally human skulls, often those of loyal servants or adepts, turned into tiny servitors. They typically have an anti-gravity unit or small suspensor that allows them to float, and a suite of sensors or tools. Many are used as camera drones, surveyors, or portable cogitators. They might carry a pict recorder to film battles, or have a built-in Vox speaker to make announcements. Some serve as assistants to officials. For instance, an inquisitor might have a servo skull that contains data archives, or can project a hololith. Because they're only a skull, their cognitive ability is limited and possibly supported by a machine logic unit. They usually only have remnants of the original brain, if any, perhaps just enough to respond to simple commands or follow a person around like a trained pet. Some servo skulls can speak with the voice of the person they once were, reciting prayers or giving warnings in a ghostly monotone. It's both macabre and commonplace in the Imperium, the ultimate utilitarian use of human remains. If you serve your master well, maybe he'll let your skull fly around serving him in death too. Interestingly, there are servo skulls known as venerable servo skulls that are kept for thousands of years. Legends say the Mechanicus has the preserved skull of the ancient Terra scientist Nikola Tesla as a servo skull, still humming with electricity after millennia. Whether that's true or just technomyth, it underscores how servo skulls can potentially live far longer than any human. In rare cases, a servo skull retains full consciousness or is given a machine-simulated personality so it can converse. But generally they're simple. Cherub servitors cherubim. Perhaps one of the strangest sights, little winged baby-like servitors that flit around carrying scrolls or censers of incense. These cherubim are vat-grown infants, or at least made to look like infants, with implanted stubby wings and simple cogitator control. They often serve the ecclesiarchy as symbolic little messengers or decoration that also has a function, like bringing a key to a priest or singing hymns with vox grills. They giggle or cry on cue, perhaps as part of ceremony, but behind those glassy doll-like eyes, there's no real child, just a programmed pseudo-angel. It's meant to represent purity in a grotesque way, but many people, understandably, find cherub servitors extremely creepy. They embody the phrase, too much time on their hands. Some artisan of the Mechanicus clearly decided standard servo drones weren't decorative enough for the cathedral, and thus cherub servitors flutter about high ceilings, sprinkling holy water or reciting verses. They are more a curiosity than a major part of imperial infrastructure, but they show how far the concept of servitors can go. Cenobite servitors. Mentioned earlier, these are servitors used by the Black Templar Space Marines to carry holy relics and books into battle. They often have speaker units to chant litanies of faith, effectively acting as moving loudspeakers extolling the God Emperor's glory while the fighting rages. The fact that these were once failed recruits adds a layer of tragedy to their role. Rather than fighting as a space marine, they shuffle alongside the chaplain, bearing the weight of reliquaries and relic banners, chanting monotone prayers through a vox grill bolted to their mouth. Translator servitors. The Imperium occasionally encounters Xenos languages or ancient dialects that need deciphering. A xenolinguist or servitor is a bizarre tool in that arsenal. A servitor programmed with extensive linguistics data, capable of translating alien texts or speech in real time. Essentially, it's a brain turned into a living translation cogitator, perhaps hooked up to auspex and vox units, so it can hear and speak accordingly. It has no idea what it's saying in any philosophical sense, but it can be used to, say, read a newly discovered alien tome and output a low Gothic translation, or serve as a go-between in negotiations. Those Xenos who see a half-human abomination chattering in their tongue might not be put at ease. Choir servitors. In some imperial churches and astropathic choirs, there are things called choir servitors, human bodies mutilated to singular purpose of producing music or psychic harmony. A choir servitor might be limbless, kept alive with life support, with pipes and vox grills implanted in their throats. They could be linked together with cables so they can sing in perfect synchronization. The ecclesiarchy might use them to provide constant background chants in cathedrals, truly a pipe organ made of people. Astropaths, imperial telepaths, sometimes utilize servitor choirs to boost signals, rows of mind-scrubbed psychers or amplifiers who harmonize thought in unison. These examples show that even art and communication can be mechanized via servitors. Animal servitors. One might assume servitor tech is only applied to humans, but the mechanicus has tried it on animals too. There are cyber critters like servoraptors, hunting birds augmented with optics and blades. Cyber eagles, psychically attuned cyber eagles used by inquisitors to scout or attack, remotely guided. And gunhounds, attack dog servitors with implanted guns or sensors. Turning a higher animal into a servitor is somewhat easier ethically for the mechanicus, since animals are not sapient, though the cult mechanicus officially frowns on wasting time cybernetically enhancing beasts when human subjects are so plentiful. One infamous use of animal servitors, House Delac of Necromunda grew eyeless mutant fish, Piscean species, and used their brains as wetware for specter servitors. There's even mention of a rogue tech priest using orc bodies to create servitors. A truly abominable heresy, since Xenos are not to be sanctified with human tech. All these fringe cases serve to reinforce a core point. Any creature with a nervous system can, in theory, be turned into a servitor. The Mechanicus mantra might as well be, if it can have implants, why not? That said, creating xenoservitors or using alien biology is very much tech heresy in the eyes of most. The idea is that servitors should only be human, or at least animal of Terran origin, as the human form is sacred and only it may be used in union with machine. Also, likely an element of speciesism. They don't want to give useful roles to filthy xenos. But in practice, some radical magos in secret labs have experimented with it due to sheer curiosity or desperation. During explorations, one Magos was noted to have outfitted his human servitors with Tau technology and even bits of Tau anti-gravity, basically mixing xenotech into servitors to improve them, skirting all kinds of orthodox doctrine. It ended poorly for him once discovered. The Ordo Hereticus and its subfaction, the Ordo Machinum, take great interest in punishing those who deviate too far in servitor experimentation. The line they draw, however, can be fuzzy. It often takes an outraged report from another tech priest or a frightened planetary governor for an investigation to happen. As long as the servitors produced are useful and don't scandalize anyone important, some magi push their creative boundaries behind closed doors. Heretic and Chaos Servitors. The Dark Mechanicum, those tech priests who sided with Chaos, also employ servitors. If you think it's not possible to make servitors more horrible, the Dark Mechanicus says, "Hold my Amasek." They delight in cruel and twisted variations. A case in point, the Sammesh Redemption Servitor. Created on the Dark Forge world of Samek, these are punishment servitors for traitors and weaklings among their own. A redemption servitor's body is heavily modified into a spider-like shape, with multiple limbs and almost complete rotational joints, able to scuttle and twist unnaturally. They have an implanted weapon called a exorcism cannon that fires from their chest, used to neutralize other machines and salvage scrap. They are also given a degree of autonomy and self-repair, with an instinct to scavenge technology. This makes them roam unpredictably, sometimes even stowing away on spacecraft and spreading to other worlds, like vermin. Their programming drives them to kill anyone in their way to acquire more scrap. Essentially, the Dark Mechanicum made a servitor that's part punishment for the victim, part guard dog, and part infesting parasite unleashed to sow terror. Some configurations of redemption servitors are rumored to have variants like guardian modes, swapping salvage tools for full weapons to act as fierce sentries, retriever modes, equipped with ensnaring webs to capture targets alive, and even skulker modes, outfitted with vox screamers to emit horrifying wails and sow fear as they stalk through underhives. Leave it to Chaos to say, what if our servitors were also murder-happy quasi-demons? Chaos forces also make use of mutant servitors and insane cyber creations. The Dark Mechanicum's kill servitors are noted. These could include mutated human stock with implanted weapons, often used in bizarre experiments, or unleashed as shock troops with even less care for their survival than the Imperials. Hard to imagine, but Chaos just wants maximum carnage. In battle, loyalist troops sometimes encounter these twisted parodies, where a servitor might have a writhing tentacle alongside mechanical parts, or the machinery is powered by warp-tainted energies. Such encounters are mercifully rare. Servitors are generally minor elements in the grand wars of the 41st millennium, but when they appear, they add to the nightmarish tapestry of war. From these examples, one truth emerges. The concept of a servitor is endlessly adaptable within the Imperium's grim toolbox. If there's a labor to be done, or a foe to be faced, and if one can stomach the moral cost, why not use a servitor to do it? That is the mindset that has taken root over thousands of years. It has led to a staggering variety of half-humans serving as everything from living forklifts and typewriters to gun platforms and cyborg assassins. Throughout this discussion, the Adeptus Mechanicus has loomed large. They are, after all, the ones who know the secrets of creating servitors. The average imperial citizen, or even a planetary governor, cannot make a servitor on their own. They lack the technical knowledge and religious sanction. So they rely on the tech priests of Mars and other Forge worlds to supply these cybernetic thralls. On Forge worlds, servitor production is an industry in itself. Deep in the biolabs and cyber foundries of Mars, conveyor belts carry human bodies, or body parts, along as clanking robotic arms. Ironically, likely automated machines, presumably monitored by priests to avoid any AI scandal, perform lobotomies and install augmetics. The tech priests chant hymns to the Omnissiah as each new servitor is blessed and awakened, in a very limited sense, to its new purpose. Serial numbers are stamped into flesh or etched on metal plating. Every servitor is catalogued, its designated function recorded in data scrolls. They are not given names, only alphanumeric designations. To the mechanicus, a servitor is not a person. It is a tool. Treating a servitor like an individual is even considered heretical by some mechanicus standards, because it implies the servitor has a spirit or identity beyond its machine purpose. It would be like naming your toaster and considering it your equal, a big no-no in their doctrine. Though amusingly, they do treat actual toasters with more reverence. But that's because the toaster isn't made from prescribed eye or a human soul. It's a pure machine with a minor machine spirit, to be revered but never allowed to grow intelligent. The Mechanicus distributes servitors to other imperial organizations. The Administratum orders hundreds for its offices. The Inquisition requests specialized ones for labs and interrogations. The Astra Militarum, Imperial Guard, needs them for logistics and battlefield support. Space Marine chapters either make their own with the help of their tech marines, or request some for their starships and armories, and so on. It's a vast, cold trade in human chattel under the guise of sanctioned cybernetic augmentation. There's no shortage of raw material either. Criminals across a million worlds, vat-grown clone stock from mechanicus gene vaults. Even the bodies of the unclaimed dead can be recycled. Some servitors are likely cadavers reanimated with machinery, essentially making them cyborg zombies if you think about it, though usually they want a living brain for better functionality. The cult Mechanicus has its own religious justification for all of this. In their theology, the union of flesh and machine is sacred. They often replace their own body parts with bionics to get closer to the machine god. A servitor is like an extreme expression of that principle, where the flesh is completely subordinated to the machine. Tech priests believe that removing a flawed human mind and replacing it with programmed purpose is a form of purification. The result is a being that will never question or deviate from the ordained task, something a pious tech priest might see as an ideal faithful servant. And because it has a human brain, however altered, they do not see it as violating the ban on artificial intelligence. It's an exploitation of a loophole, yes, but one sanctified by 10 millennia of use and ritual. The decree is clear: thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. But a servitor is a human mind, only crippled and shackled, so technically it's allowed. We might wonder, do any within the Imperium ever balk at this practice? Surely some inquisitors or moral individuals have qualms. Indeed, a few do. There have been some philosophical discussions about the souls of servitors. The Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy, is mainly concerned that heretics and sinners get their just punishment, and servitor conversion is seen as just that for many. But some more empathetic clerics view it as denying the emperor a soul that could have otherwise been redeemed through penitence or martyrdom. If a criminal could have repented and died heroically, perhaps their soul would reach the emperor's grace. If instead they're turned into a servitor, their soul is in limbo, neither fully alive nor dead, for as long as that servitor persists. It raises theological questions. Does a servitor still have a soul? If the person's mind is wiped away, is the soul gone too, or is it trapped until the body finally dies? The official doctrine isn't clearly defined. Most assume the soul lingers until physical death, at which point it goes to the afterlife, the warp, as normal. If that's true, being a servitor might delay one's final judgment by centuries, essentially keeping you from peace or damnation, stuck in purgatory on earth. It's one reason the ecclesiarchy is completely fine with servitors made from heretics. It actually denies the heretics' soul release, making them work for the emperor even while their eventual fate, likely damnation, is put on hold. Quite a punishment indeed. You don't even get the Emperor's judgment or the warp's torment yet. You must first labor until destroyed. Then your soul will be cast to the ether. From the mechanicus perspective, however, such metaphysics are secondary. They care about output, efficiency, and the purity of technology. And here, servitors shine in their eyes. They are incredibly efficient workers. They don't form unions. They don't need comfortable living quarters, just a closet to stand in when off duty, if that. They don't eat fine food. Nutrient paste pumped into their veins suffices. They don't sleep on the job, and they definitely don't question orders or innovate, which in a rigid hierarchy like the Imperium is often seen as a good thing. Creativity can equal heresy, after all. A task that would exhaust a normal person can be done by a servitor indefinitely. Need that cargo bay unloaded all night? The servitors will keep at it until everything is moved, or until their limbs literally break down. And if one breaks, the mechanicus will replace a limb or just toss the whole unit and get another. The Imperium's forge worlds can output servitors in the millions. In dire times, some war zones have seen waves of servitors being marched in as fodder, cheaper than training new guardsmen, if less effective in a firefight. The mechanicus treat it as a numbers game. Flesh is renewable, especially criminal flesh. Metal is durable. Combine the two and you have an assembly line of obedient servants to fuel the war machine and the administrative behemoth of the Imperium. It is telling that on some forge worlds, actual baseline humans are relatively few, mostly the tech priests and a small population of trainees or lay workers, whereas the vast majority on the factory floor are servitors. A forge world might appear nearly automated to an outside observer, until you look closer and realize those machines, stamping out tank parts, have pallid torsos and what used to be human faces wired into them. The cult mechanicus likes it that way, machines doing all the labor with just enough organic component to skirt the ancient ban. The Adeptus Mechanicus also keeps tight control over the servitor creation process. It's not knowledge widely taught outside their order. So if a planetary governor wants more servitors for their mines, they typically must petition the Mechanicus or have a Mechanicus enclave on world handle it. This gives the tech priests power and leverage. They decide how many and what type of servitors to supply. It's one more reason no one wants to anger the Mechanicus. They might cut off your supply of replacement parts, or servitors. An administratum clerk uprising because they lost all their servitor scribes would grind a planet's paperwork to a halt. In truth, though, most imperial officials view servitors as just another piece of equipment, albeit one with a horrifying origin they prefer not to dwell on. It's easier to issue an order like send 100 servitors to refuel the plasma core, if you don't think about where those servitors came from. Many likely distance themselves mentally. These aren't people, they're devices. Such denial is practically necessary to cope in a civilization that routinely does things that would be considered atrocities by any humane standard. A fate worse than death. Conclusion. We return to that phrase, a fate worse than death. In the case of servitors, it isn't hyperbole. To be made a servitor is to have everything taken from you, your mind, your future, your freedom, and even your death. For death, when it finally comes, will be on someone else's terms, not yours. It is a state of living death where your body is little more than a puppet operated by programming and wires. Those rare flickers of humanity that might remain only serve to underscore the horror, like faint screams echoing in a silent chamber. For the Imperium of Man, servitors are a necessary evil, a cornerstone of their society's functioning. They allow the Imperium's grand and terrible civilization to continue despite its ban on true AI, and despite the endless labor needs of a galaxy-spanning empire. The people of the Imperium largely accept servitors as normal. They are as much a part of daily life as cogitators, lasguns, and the God Emperor's statues. But what this acceptance says about humanity's compassion, or lack thereof, in the 41st millennium is deeply unsettling. In a society where turning a person into a device is routine, one wonders what value individual life truly has. For the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Servitor is the perfect symbol of their creed, the merging of flesh and machine to serve a higher purpose. For the Adeptus Arbites and Inquisition, the Servitor is the ultimate deterrent and punishment. Step out of line and you won't even be granted execution. You'll become an automaton to serve the very ideals you betrayed. For the Imperial Guard and Navy, servitors are uncomplaining allies, the first to die in a breach or to keep the ship running under fire. And for the countless planetary governors and factory overseers, servitors are simply cheaper and more reliable than human workers, a brutally pragmatic labor force that asks for nothing, literally cannot ask for anything in return. Yet, despite all of the justifications and uses, one cannot shake the visceral truth. Every servitor was a human life, perhaps grown for that purpose, perhaps a convicted criminal, perhaps a fallen aspirant, but a human life nonetheless, now reduced to a shambling, butchered state. The grimdark future is often painted with grand wars and cosmic horrors, but sometimes it's the ordinary, everyday horrors that truly drive home how bleak the universe has become. A person forced into ceaseless drudgery without thought or hope is not as flashy as a planet-destroying superweapon or a demon prince, but in many ways it is more disturbing. It's a practice that shows the dehumanization at the heart of the Imperium. In a galaxy rife with giant monsters and psychic terrors, it's easy to overlook the tragedy of the Servitor. But it might be one of the darkest fates awaiting anyone unlucky enough to fall into the system's gears. It's telling that even hardened Imperial citizens use the term as a dire warning. Careful, or you'll end up a servitor. It means keep your head down, obey, don't attract the wrong attention, because there are indeed fates in the 41st millennium far worse than a simple death. Death, after all, would be an end. A servitor's existence is unending servitude in life and possibly even beyond, as long as the mechanical parts keep whirring. So spare a thought, perhaps even a twisted prayer, for the servitors that surround humanity in the far future. They will never know your pity or your scorn, mind you. They cannot acknowledge it. But consider them nonetheless. The men, women, and others whose lives have been erased and repurposed to become the unsung, unliving cogs in the great imperial machine. Each servitor is a testament to the extremes of oppression and technology in human society. Each is a reminder that in the Imperium, the value of a human being is measured only by how useful their corpse can be made. And if you ever find yourself dreaming of the far future and imagining what role you might play, be thankful that dream ends when you wake. In the reality of Warhammer 40, one doesn't always get to be the hero or the valiant soldier. There's a very real chance you'd end up on the labor decks, blank-eyed and obedient, another servitor among millions, living out a fate truly worse than death. In the grim darkness of the far future, some lives don't end in death at all. They simply go on and on and on.